Welcome to Retirement Unlocked with Larry Heller. Your life, your way, unlimited possibilities. Join us as we explore how tailored financial planning and investments can help you navigate life transitions with confidence. Let's dive into this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to the Retirement Unlocked podcast with your host, Larry Heller. Today, we're going to discuss retirement planning for business owners. And our guest today is Paul Cronin, a seasoned entrepreneur and M&A advisor with over 30 years experience in sales management and consulting. He's owned 3 businesses and worked in exit planning and business sales since 2009. Paul is now on the part of the M&A team at Touchstone Advisors. He's also a sought-after speaker who's presented at institutions like the Harvard Business School, Babson, and Northeastern. All right, Larry, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today. We've got a great topic to talk about. So why don't we jump into it, Paul? Welcome. And why don't we kind of just go right through it and talk about how retirement plays into a business owner's decision or desire to sell their business?
Sure. Well, what I tell all business owners, and first of all, thanks for having me, is every business owner is going to leave their business someday. And really only have 2 choices. They can plan forward on their terms or let others plan it for them. So it's kind of which sounds better to you. And all of us, because of that in our society, the norm is you get to a certain stage of life, like me, a guy in his 60s. And when you meet people for lunch, as I did today, they said, "So, are you retired yet?" and if you own a business, it doesn't really matter. For a lot of business owners, the second part, a follow-on question is, so what are you going to do with the business if you want to retire? And that's how we end up on shows talking about business, selling, and retirement.
Okay. So when should someone start thinking about this? I mean, you mentioned this, the 60s, but probably people come to you and they're, okay, I want to sell, and I think tomorrow this is going to turn on a switch and be good. But so one day they wake up, I want to retire. So should they kind of start thinking about it then?
That's too late. It is if you're trying to retire soon, as I like to say. Most business owners today realize that it takes a while to sell a business. Some don't. Some are delusional. They think, it's like selling a house. You call a realtor and, do what you have to do. But it takes 2 to 3 years typically to really get completely ready. Most business owners spend most of their career, as I have, focus on how do you bring some revenue in? How do you make money? How do you pay the bills and put kids through school and everything else that you need to do? And that, I'll figure out what to do with the business someday. But what always happens, inevitably, is some combination of the 4 Ds occurs to every business owner. And that's death, disability, divorce, or disagreement. Disagreement being with partners, for example. And all partnerships end. They are organic beings. They have a birth, a life, and a death. Mm-hmm. And any of those other Ds could happen to the owner, but just as likely it happens to people they care about. Friends, family, etc. And that just gets, the ultimate existential question is, what am I going to do with this business?
So yeah, I like the 3D scenario now. So what do many people face when they think about leaving or selling the business? What should they be thinking about?
Well, the first thing is who would buy my business, and a way to invert that question is, would I buy my business? Right? Which is really a hard thing to answer for a lot of business owners. Sadly, I occasionally will get calls. Most of my clients, really all my clients, come from referral, but occasionally I get calls from business owners, and I have to sell my business. And I said, gee, why is that? Well, I'm losing money. I can't afford to lose any more money. And like, well, why would you buy your business? Well, of course not. Why would you expect anyone else to buy your business? So that's a good question to ask. But, before all that, the preparation piece is to speak to, in some form, I call the Holy Trinity of business owners. And if you're Catholic, you know what that means. But it's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? Well, there's an accountant, a lawyer, and a financial advisor tend to be the three most trusted advisors for most business owners throughout most of their career. And those are the conversations you typically are going to have with those people in some form, right? The financial advisor is going to ask you, what's a company worth? Because that's part of their job, right? Accountants are going to be presenting you with some sort of financials, which give you a sense of, if you look at the balance statement, you can go, gee, is my equity increasing or decreasing? And depending on what kind of relationship you have with your lawyer, they could be asking you questions about, contracts, buy-sell agreements, all sorts of things that relate to what is going to happen to the business. So if you're having those conversations with some regularity as a business owner, you're sort of bumping up against this existential question anyway.
So, Paul, what do you think of a business, kind of an exercise that a business owner can follow when they're trying to get started in selling their practice or their business?
Yeah, so the exercise I recommend is called What Goals Can I Accomplish by Selling My Business? And there's personal goals, business goals, and financial goals. They're not always equal to one another. They sometimes can be in conflict. But if you take that question at the top of a sheet and have 3 columns, list your business goals, list your personal goals, and list your financial goals, often perhaps talking through these goals with someone you trust, you're more likely to come up with the kind of goals that can be accomplished if you sell your business. And if you don't spend time thinking through those goals, if perhaps it's like, I've just got to sell my business for whatever the reason, all the other goals that you haven't fully explored will emerge, and you'll suddenly come in conflict with, what the deal looks like at the end.
So when I talk to some business owners, I tell them, put down your must-haves. Like, what are your must-haves when you're going to try to sell the business? And if they can put down a couple of those, a lot of the other issues that some kind of come up kind of go into the background. So it's one of the things that I do if I have a business owner is talking or thinking about starting to sell. So, one of the things, and I guess you can relate to this, is when someone goes to sell, they have this business, but is the business in the right place in order for them to sell? What I mean by that is, are the financials in the proper place? How much expenses that they may be running through the business that they shouldn't be running through the business? So what do you think of a business valuation as it relates to an owner's decision to sell and some of the things that that business owner can be doing?
Yeah, I think evaluation can have a lot of, can be very meaningful to a lot of business owners. And it depends what every valuation has a purpose, right? So if it's just, I'm trying to get a sense of what this business is worth to do estate planning, well, then that's what that's for. If you have a third party, whether it's myself or others, you're getting a real sense of what this business might be worth to an outside buyer, for example. It's not an inside sale. So that can be helpful. But the blocking and tackling before you get to me is really, again, talking to those trusted advisors to make sure, do my books actually make sense? All right. You alluded to, the personal expenses, which are often quite legal to run through the business, but they end up sometimes becoming a hindrance when you're trying to figure out what the real value of the business, and buyers sometimes will, get concerned with that.
Yeah, you mentioned, valuation. I think that's so important because a lot of people a lot of times overvalue what they think the business is worth. So
everyone. I haven't had a business owner yet in all the years I've been doing it that undervalued their business. That will be a first, Larry.
Yeah. So getting a third party in, a professional that can, be a middleman or kind of abstract for it is a great idea. So those are some of the things that a business owner should try to do. What are kind of like the three biggest mistakes that someone trying to sell a business makes?
Well, the first is, thinking you can just sell your business when you're ready. A business only sells when the business is ready. That's it. I mean, other than liquidation value, virtually anything can be liquidated. So, you could say, well, I've saved enough for retirement. I guess it's time to sell my company. Doesn't really matter. If your business isn't transferable, like if it's really me incorporated, as I say, is, what's your first line level of management? The guy in the mirror. That's a more difficult business to sell. Again, and it can have a value, but it might not be worth the fees that you pay lawyers and accountants to help you sell the company. Another could be you get a call, an unsolicited offer, and then you decide that, oh, that's fine. I've got a team. We'll work this on our own. We've got a lawyer. We've got an accountant. We're just fine. The difficulty with that is you've just taken on the job of an M&A advisor while you're running a company. And, it's not an easy thing to sell a company. You also are telling the buyer that they have no competition, which means that they will take as much time as they need to, particularly if you're talking to a professional buyer, like a private equity fund. A private equity firm may look at 1,000 companies a year. The fact that they're pursuing you just means there's 999 others that they're also looking at. And so it's really wise when someone does call on you unsolicited to talk to your trusted advisors and say, is there somebody I should be talking to learn about the process? Because sometimes, an M&A advisor would say, that PE, you were one of the 50 calls they had to make today. You're not ready to go to market right now.
So let's see if we can get some examples. I'll put you a little bit on the spot. So without obviously naming names, but can you give an example of a business owner that came to you with thinking they were when you said they were going to, looks like they were going to make some mistakes, and what you were able to do to kind of help them avoid that? A lot of people don't realize what an M&A advisor does. So if you can give us a specific, I think the audience would kind of love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a gentleman who, had been thinking seriously about selling. He got an unsolicited offer, and at the same time, he was seriously considering adding in a whole new product line, which was going to be a 7-figure investment. And, the question that comes back to that, what are you really trying to accomplish, right? If you're going to make this big investment, it could take years before you can get a return on that. Is the buyer going to pay you for that? Or should you wait, right? Other examples, where I've seen is, if you will, sort of the sad example, I've got to sell my business. I'm like, no, you can't sell your business right now. You've got to step back. You've got to think through this. Another one could be, I really like to sell it to, my manager. He's been very loyal. I want to work things out with him. And I said, well, that's great, but, they have, unless they've got great credit, it's going to be a kind of a challenge. And unless you've got great profits, that can be provable to the bank, how is that person going to borrow the money to pay you back? Unless, of course, you want to be the bank, right? You're going to offer them a 10-year loan at X% and wait for them to pay you back out of the profits of your business.
So how long typically is the process? So when someone comes to you and says, I'm ready to sell my business, can you kind of go through the steps that you take when you're meeting with a prospective client, and each step until they eventually have a successful sale?
Yeah. So the process we use in my company is we always like to start with what we call an estimate of value, which is slightly different than a formal business valuation that you might get from an appraisal firm. It's a whole show about the different kind of valuations, but the estimate of value is essentially what would this business sell as it exists today to a third party. We like to start there because it allows us to get into the financials. It gets to see how things are organized. And quite frankly, do we like these people? Right? I have no interest in working with people who are no fun. Okay. It's just not worth the aggravation. My nickname for M&A, by the way, it should be migraines and aggravation because you need a high tolerance. But assuming you can go through the valuation, which can take, let's face it, it can take a month or it could take 4 months. It depends on, what happens. But a more typical engagement from when both parties, myself and the business owner agree, it makes sense to sell the company. I always tell them plan on 12 months. If you can get it done in 9 months, great. It rarely happens in 6 months. And I'm sure some people will say they can do so, but in my experience, plan on a year. And that's from the engagement. That's after you've already done valuation, after you've done everything else. So it can take a while.
So now they've come to you and you've done these valuations and your pre-valuation that's taken, maybe a month, maybe 4 months. What's the next step that you do? We actually go back to the financials and we dig deeper into them and we start trying to understand, what are the core issues that buyers would raise their eyes over, right? And I call it a financial proctology exam, and it's just as much fun. Like, what is this $20,000 expense over here? And then you say, that was a lawsuit I settled. With who? With my brother. I had to get him out of the business, right? Okay, we got to know about that stuff. Theoretically, that could come up in the valuation too, but it's more important. And then you're actually getting to the business strategy, like, what kind of buyers would want this? What are the growth opportunities? What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Then you're building things like, what does the confidential information memorandum look like, or the SIM, which can be 10 pages, it can be 50 pages, depends on the sophistication of the business. So there's all of the core elements that are required to prepare all the marketing materials. You're also at the same time preparing a broad list. In our case, we usually come up with a universe as many as 500 or 600 potential acquirers, strategic acquirers or private equity firms. And then we winnow that down. So once you've got the marketing piece together and you've got your target acquirer list, then you're ready to go to market. Well, that period alone can take 3 months. We just got one ready to go to market and only took 8 months to go to market, right? It happens, right? Businesses have issues. And then just so clever. So one of the reasons why to use an M&A is really putting that SIM together in the proper way that when you send that SIM out to the target potential buyers, they're attracted, so they want to come back and get some more information, correct?
Yeah, so slightly different. So we typically, you're going to start very high level. You might have a 5-bullet email. XYZ, here are the things. Are you interested? Click here, sign the non-disclosure. Here's the blind profile. It's kind of a 1-page, anonymized summary of the business. And then that particular target, the acquirer, can then, after they sign the NDA, then they get access to the SIM and what's called the data room, which has all the financials and everything else about the business. So that buyer, potential acquirer, can start digging into the business and they come up with their list of questions to try to understand.
And then I guess then you kind of go back and forth until you have somebody a little bit more, 1 or 2 firms that are interested. And then I guess you then go even deeper, correct?
Yeah, so it's sort of like, 3 months to get it ready, 3 months in the market, 3 months to sort of winnow it down to getting to some kind of letter of intent where you sign it off and now you're gone exclusive. And then whether it's 2 months, 3 months, or 6 months of due diligence, hopefully not 6 months, that's how you end up with that taking 12 months to finally actually get a closed transaction. Oh, and by the way, the bonus is 2 to 3 months afterwards, there's post-transaction issues that sort of come up and you hang around. So it just takes a while. And then you get the actual transition, which can take 1 to 3 years, depending on the nature of the business, before you're totally, completely out of the business.
Right. So I guess if you're really kind of looking to retire and they're looking for it, you want to exit, you just kind of put this time frame together between preparing, then presenting, and then staying on in the business. It could be a 5-year time frame from the time.
For a larger business, if you're running a $10 million company, the idea that you're going to be out in 6 months is pretty unusual. Certainly a year. Most businesses, certainly a private equity company, they're going to ask the seller to sign, a 3-year engagement, usually some form of consulting contract. And usually after 12 to 18 months, both parties start to figure out that they don't need each other anymore. And then they just sort of close out the contract, buy it out in some form. But that's what you sort of buy into. If you're selling the corner store and you're selling it to an internal employee, who's been your manager for a long time, I had a situation many years ago where that's just what happened. And so the seller said, I'm available 5 days a week for a month. And then I'm available 3 days a week for another month. And I'm available 2 days a week for another month. And that particular buyer, he ended up with a quarterly lunch with that business owner for about 4 years, and that just is the nature you can develop with that. It's a little different when you get into a larger business and private equity.
So if you're a business owner and you're really starting to think about a retirement or an exit strategy, you really want to start thinking about this years in advance so you can plan properly and have the necessary time. And then you're not kind of still working when you thought you'd be sitting on a beach somewhere in retirement.
Yeah, it makes sense. I always tell people, it's like people reach the age of 60 as business owners and a subconscious bell goes off in the back of their head. They're like, I should be thinking about this, driving down the road, whatever the case may be. And the difference between those who hear that bell and successfully exit, between those people and the people who hear that bell and then, get on to the next phone call is really the difference between success and failure. And unfortunately, most business owners don't successfully leave their company.
Great point to be taken. Any final thoughts that you have today? There's a lot of good information here for our business owners out there.
Yeah, I always say is, talk to your trusted advisors. Try to have some conversation with M&A advisors sooner. The good ones are not going to sit there and try to shove a contract under your nose to let me sell your business now. Anyone who does, walk away. Is not the one you want to talk to, and learn about the weaknesses in your business now so that you can start working on them. And then you have a business that's ready to sell when you're ready to sell.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul, for joining us today. If somebody wants to speak to you further, wants to reach out to you, where's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Just my email, pcronin@touchstoneadvisors.com.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Paul.
Enjoyed it very much.
And thanks for tuning into the Retirement Unlocked podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might benefit from listening to the show. Now, if you want to take the next step, in the episode description, not only are you going to have Paul's email address and his contact information, but you'll find a link to the Heller Wealth Management website with more resources and the option to schedule a complimentary 20-minute phone call with their team. Your ideal retirement starts with a conversation. Let's get started. We'll see you next time on Retirement Unlocked.